Today I'd like to show you the 60 to 120 system. It's divided amongst two setups, the overhead rig and the editing station, which I've been using for about a year now. Today we'll focus on just the editing station. Now it's not a pretty setup, but it is incredibly functional. So this is more about what it can do for you instead of showing its form. And it was initially built as a prototype, so there are definitely some rough edges to this thing. I guess this is something you can call a YouTube studio on wheels, as it's the workhorse behind all of the productions on this channel alongside the other channels. It solves a very simple yet unique issue that many creators in this industry experience, and that is creating content at a fast pace while maintaining a certain level of quality. For most people this would be a stationary setup, but my main goal with YouTube was to further enhance the craft of creating, and so I wanted this to be somewhat modular of a system. Instead of lighting a scene once, doing it in different styles is something that may benefit your ability to create outside of this environment as well. And that's why everything is on wheels, but of course also to help with space optimization. So if this room ever needs to be completely empty, the setups can just roll into the hallway. And this also helps with noise, as the two workhorse editing computers are mounted underneath the overhead rig, which again can be rolled into a different room. With that said, let's start with output. So in other words, what will the setup allow you to do and how? It comes down to one thing: it improves efficiency and therefore allows for higher quality or higher quantity. So to give an example, I have a gaming channel and it centers around pretty ordinary shots. Now to produce these shots, we have a top cam right there that captures my mouse and keyboard alongside the face cam, and these go straight into the capture card on the PC and into OBS, allowing us to capture these cameras in sync with the gameplay footage. Pretty standard stuff, right? Now there's a foot pedal at the base of this setup. Anytime something interesting happens, I hit the right pedal and that makes a loud beep. Now we can't actually hear this beep because it's being sent to the top monitor. The thing is, OBS can hear the beep, and you can see it in the audio waveform when we import the footage into our NLE. So those dots are right after something interesting happens in game, which saves countless hours of editing. Surprisingly, this also trickles down into what I'm doing right now, so I actually really suck at talking into the camera. Half the time I misspeak, and often after about half an hour I start slurring my words. Now anytime there is a good take, I'll hit that pedal or the Stream Deck integrated into the desktop, and all the mistakes that I made during the recording session don't also eat into my editing time. And this method starts to really open up doors, right? So it isn't just limited to gaming content. You can record talking head videos, tutorials, make calls with clients, because these cameras also work as webcams. Now you can also bring the two setups together for a more traditional YouTube setup, where you can do an unboxing, for example. And as you saw here, the two camera inputs are placed next to each other. This allows us to capture the top cam and the face cam at the same time. And when we bring that into our NLE, our editing software, we can create a preset to quickly switch between the two. It's pretty handy. Of course, there is more time required to set this up, as you have to move the two setups closer together and do the lighting for everything again. So if you're really strapped for time, a stationary setup would work better in this scenario. But for me, that would mean I'd get quite bored pretty quick. And for medium to small spaces, this is pretty versatile because you basically have multiple setups in one. Now the possibilities are not limited to the stuff I'll show in this video, so I'm really curious what you come up with. Definitely let us know in the comments down below. Now, when it comes down to talking headshots, we do have two choices of audio. So for tutorials, there's a dynamic microphone right over there which feeds straight into the Audio Box Go. And for this shot that you're watching right now, I'm using the Tascam X6, and this also feeds into the Audio Box Go. It's recorded straight into OBS, so after recording we can basically go straight to the editing process. Now to be honest, I am looking to upgrade that top microphone to a shotgun. It's not recommended to use shotgun microphones indoors, but in a well-treated room they do sound impressively good, so to say. They have that bassy feeling, and currently the Podcapture X6 is mounted on the Rode PSA-1, and that's kind of a temporary solution, so you'll just have to excuse how it looks at the moment. The way that the pod mic is mounted there is actually on a monitor arm, which works surprisingly well, and I really like the look of it. It's easy to bring down into position, doesn't require any extra mounts because it just uses the monitor arm poles at the back of the setup, and it's nice and low profile, so that keeps the setup a bit more minimal. It doesn't really matter what cameras you use for something like this, but for the shot that you're seeing right now, I'm using the XT30, which is mounted permanently on the setup with a teleprompter attached, so that I can see my notes and actually remember what I was blabbering on about in these videos. Now I'd love to upgrade this to a Elgato prompter, and that would fit this station perfectly, but for now it's a DIY solution with the Portkeys PT5 connected, allowing any window to be dragged onto the device. So right after finishing a script, when it's still fresh in your mind, you can set up and start talking within like 30 seconds. Now at the moment I'm sitting about 1.5 meters away from the camera, and for this shot I'm often using the 23 or the 33mm from Viltrox. If I had decorated my room in a more pleasing way, I would use the 16mm from Fuji. It has a more open feeling and that would work a bit better for a setup like this. Strangely enough, I talk about lighting every video separately, and then there's a COB mounted on this thing in a very stationary way. But I found that I always ended up with the same kind of style when it comes down to the key light. Now the background, I really like to give that a different tone. So yeah, this thing is on there permanently. It's pretty much at the exact angle that I like for this shot. So it gives it this decently contrasty image with nice fall off around the face, let's say. It's surprisingly soft for how small of a source it is. And it does allow for pretty fast setup. You just roll this thing around with the equipment turned on and OBS running to find a neat angle. In the space I am right now, I feel like I've explored most angles, so it's really something for perhaps a bigger studio down the line. It's also fun to just sit and edit in different parts of your home. Having a different view from time to time can give you some more inspiration. I designed these panels to custom fit all of the accessories. They are simply 3D printed with the Creality Ender 3 V2, so a pretty entry-level printer there. If you want this to look better, you could also just sand down the parts and spray paint them with a glossy finish. So alongside the Stream Deck and the Loop Deck, it also houses the security camera, some I/O ports for the mouse and keyboard, alongside a Google Home, and the controls for the sit-stand legs. Now that's a pretty important aspect of this setup, as it can be quite important to have height adjustability in order to craft scenes. So currently I usually drop it down to base height, which for these PlexiSpot legs is about 62 centimeters. This means that the camera sits at my preferred height for this talking headshot, so it's not too high where the viewer looks down on you, but not too low because I want us just to be on the same level, so to say. You can really get into the nitty-gritty of the psychology behind all this stuff, but that's also something for a different video. Now these legs are actually integrated into the desktop by use of these 3D printed inserts, giving it a pretty clean look. So usually there would be this pretty ugly frame underneath that holds the motors in place, but I wasn't really having that. Now the baseline design, as you see in the overhead rig, was put together in under a day, basically a weekend gig. And this setup with the slanted design took far longer, as those angles are pretty difficult to get right. But realistically, it's the only design that will utilize these angles. This build methodology isn't really a concern for most people, but I do have a lot more designs planned for an ultra-optimized studio, which will require more of these things to be built. So I hope this video gave you some inspiration, and hopefully see you in the next one.